You stare at that dark patch slowly spreading across your shower ceiling. You wash it away, but it returns. You hit it with harsh chemicals, and it just grows back thicker. You drop hundreds of dollars on fancy air dryers, yet every single year, that exact same murky stain appears right in the corner. Now, picture a plain piece of copper wire, slimmer than a standard pencil, wiping out every last bit of mildew in your house permanently. No toxic sprays, no expensive gadgets, no filters to swap out every month. The Amish community out in Holmes County has relied on this trick since long before you were even born, and practically no one in the outside world has a clue why it actually works. The very first time I stepped foot inside a 2-century-old farm property out near Charm, Ohio, I wasted the entire afternoon hunting for mildew. There was absolutely zero. None in the food cellar, none in the washroom, and not even behind the heavy heating stove where dampness always builds up the most. What I am getting ready to reveal to you originates from a totally ignored farming report published in Pennsylvania back in 1897. It is a method so incredibly basic that you could set it up this coming weekend in the very property you already live in. I honestly used to believe dealing with fungus was just an inevitable reality of having a house. You battle it, you fail, and then you battle it all over again. That is exactly what the big home improvement chains need you to think. Every jug of chlorine, every spray bottle of cleaner, and every pricey air scrubber represents an endless stream of cash flowing from your bank account directly into theirs. For the better part of 3 decades, I was one of those loyal paying customers. That all changed when I crossed paths with a dairy farmer named Eli Miller. He manages a milk farm just outside Millersburg, and his milking barn is arguably the most spotless building I have ever walked into. There was no overwhelming chemical scent, no sticky film on the surfaces. It was just bare cedar planks, a stone floor, and one thin copper cable tracing the bottom edge of the wall driven straight into the dirt outdoors. When I questioned him about it, he just gave a grin and explained that it was his secret to keeping the dark fuzz away. I honestly thought he was messing with me. I really did. So I headed straight home that evening and started doing my own research. What I uncovered completely shifted my perspective on my own home forever. People have known copper stops microscopic growth ever since ancient Egypt used it to purify their drinking supply 4 millennia ago. However, the exact setup Eli utilized goes straight back to an old paper I tracked down deep in the Penn State Extension archives. It was an 1897 report penned by an agricultural researcher named Dr. William Freer. Freer was investigating why specific Dutch barns in Pennsylvania stayed perfectly solid, while nearby barns completely rotted away in under 2 decades. What he wrote down was something academic institutions quietly shoved in a drawer and never printed again. Freer discovered that farm buildings featuring copper grounding cables attached to their base beams had a massive 94% less fungal growth than identical buildings missing those wires. 94%. He credited this phenomenon to a process he labeled galvanic displacement. When copper is securely connected to moist soil, it generates a microscopic electrical pulse. It is powerful enough to shatter the cell walls of fungi, yet way too faint for any person or livestock to even notice. The floating spores land. The floating spores die. It really is that straightforward. The Amish never needed a university doctor to explain this to them. They had been relying on this technique for ages, handing it down from Swiss and German rock workers who carried the knowledge over the ocean back in the early 1700s. But here is the critical thing you have to grasp. Back in 1952, when the modern construction business was putting together the very first standardized housing rules, using copper grounds to stop mildew was purposefully left out of the accepted practices. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded way too well, and it cost next to nothing. A 20-foot stretch of plain copper cable runs you around $11. One single setup holds up for a century without a drop of upkeep. Weigh that against the current American mold removal business, which rakes in upwards of $4 billion every single year. You can bet someone made certain that wire never made it into the rule book. Now, you are probably wondering, how exactly does a random strip of metal inside my wall track down where the mildew is hiding? The truth is, it doesn't need to track it down. This is the concept that took me the absolute longest to wrap my head around, and the moment it finally clicked, I felt like I had been scammed for my entire adult life. Mildew spores do not just drift aimlessly through your rooms hunting for a lucky spot to crash. They actually set up camp wherever there is a tiny difference in static electricity on a wet surface. Your sheetrock, your timber frames, the plaster between your bathroom tiles, they all build up a microscopic positive electrical charge whenever the air moisture creeps above 50%. Meanwhile, the floating spores carry a negative charge. They get dragged right to those surfaces, just like tiny metal shavings flying toward a magnet. That is the exact reason why that one specific corner keeps turning black. It is why scrubbing it away never actually solves the issue. A correctly grounded copper cable simply drains that built-up positive charge straight down into the dirt outside long before those spores ever get the opportunity to stick. If there is no landing zone, there is no fuzzy colony. The wire is not killing fungus that has already grown. It is completely stopping the specific electrical environment that lets the fungus take root in the first place. And once you put it in right, your home basically turns invisible to the spores floating in the air. Cornell University actually ran a study on this exact phenomenon back in 2011, though you really have to hunt to track the paper down. They tried out grounded copper setups inside 12 different farm homes up in New York State. All of them were constructed before 1920, and every single one had a history of severe, recurring mildew. After 18 months went by, 11 of those 12 houses had absolutely zero measurable fungal growth. That final 12th house only failed because a busted water pipe completely flooded the setup. The scientists quietly wrapped up the paper by stating that passive electrical grounding is a highly effective, totally ignored way to solve dampness issues. And then the entire study was shoved under the rug. No big media announcements, no extra money for more tests, just locked away in a digital folder that average homeowners will never ever see. Why did that happen? Because a permanent $11 fix does not create payrolls, it does not push products off shelves, and it certainly does not print out a monthly bill for anyone. The whole market is not built to hand you permanent fixes. It is built to sell you endless subscriptions. Now, if you already own your place, and you are sitting there worrying this only works for folks building a brand new house from the dirt up, stick with me, because this next part is aimed right at you. You do not have to rip open a single piece of drywall. You do not need to hire a builder. You definitely do not need to pull a city permit for what I'm about to tell you, because you are not messing with your home's actual power grid at all. You are just making a passive ground line, which the law views as a simple decoration unless it touches your breaker box, and we are absolutely not doing that. Here is exactly the step-by-step. Head over to any local hardware shop and grab a 25-foot spool of number 10 bare, solid copper wire. That will set you back roughly $15. Pick up one copper ground rod, 4 feet long, for about $12. Grab a single brass split bolt connector for $3. Your total cash out of pocket is under $35. First, figure out which wall in your place constantly grows that dark fuzz. It is usually the washroom, a dark spot in the basement, or an outside wall facing the north. Just lay that copper cable right along the bottom edge of that wall. You can tuck it under the baseboard with a tiny chisel, or just slap some paint right over it. That cable just needs to travel from the inside of that room, poke straight through the exterior wall, and run down to that grounding rod you hammered 4 feet deep into the yard, as tight against the house foundation as possible. Secure the wire onto the rod using that little brass connector, and that is it. No electricity, no batteries to swap, no buttons to press. The actual planet acts as the drain, the copper acts as the highway. Your stubborn mildew issue will start fading away in about 10 days. The Amish refer to this trick as setting the drain, and every single property I checked out in Holmes County had at least one set up down in the cellar and another one near the wash basins. Eli Miller mentioned that his grandpa put theirs in back in 1943, and not a single person has messed with it since. That is over 80 years of clean walls from one basic piece of wiring. But this is where things get truly fascinating, because there is an extra level to this trick that even the Amish generally keep quiet about. And it perfectly explains why this method is vastly more effective in historic homes compared to brand new builds. Houses put up before the 1980s were constructed using old-growth timber. We are talking slowly matured oak, pine, and chestnut wood packed with dense grains and loads of natural sap. That specific timber carries a totally unique electrical footprint compared to the rapidly grown, oven-baked wood used today. Dr. Freer actually pointed this out in his 1897 research. The older wood framing serves as a built-in magnifier for the copper's grounding pull. The dried sap inside the aged timber carries that microscopic current throughout the whole wall stud, essentially transforming the entire structure into a massive static drain. Current building practices, using glued-together wood and plastic wraps, actually disrupt this natural flow. That is exactly why so many freshly built houses suffer from endless mildew issues, even with all their moisture wraps and high-tech fans. They are completely dead electrically. Your older home, the exact one you have been struggling with for years, is actually the perfect environment for this setup. Think about the gravity of that. Every selling point the housing market feeds you about a new build being superior is completely backwards. Your home's old bones, the solid wood, the slightly bowed walls, those aren't your problem. They are an incredibly powerful solution just sitting there waiting for you to flip the switch. Now, I made a guarantee at the start of this video. I told you about a method hidden so thoroughly in the archives that practically no one alive knows about it. Well, here it is. On page 43 of Freer's 1,897 document, there is a tiny drawing that almost everyone overlooked. It depicts that same copper grounding cable, but tied around it every 12 inches are little pouches of a very specific substance. Freer described it as loosely packed, charred oak tree bark. He recorded that setups utilizing this extra step achieved an almost complete elimination of fungal spore sprouting compared to just using plain copper. I was completely clueless about what that meant until I sat down with an 89-year-old Amish community leader out in Lancaster County. He just chuckled at my question. He then walked me to his timber shed and pointed to a rack covered in what appeared to be dark, crumbly rocks. It was oak bark, stripped right when the spring sap begins moving, and then slowly roasted over a small flame until it became a cross between pure charcoal and activated carbon. He referred to it as the black coal. His relatives have been producing it for 6 straight generations. You just take small handfuls of this burnt bark, wrap them in breathable cloth, and knot those little sacks to your copper cable every foot or so. That roasted oak becomes incredibly porous and superconductive when paired with the grounded copper. It generates what the old researcher called a biological scavenger field. The metal wire stops the static charge that mildew needs to grow, while the burnt bark acts like a sponge, physically sucking floating spores right out of the air from up to 6 feet away and destroying them through the grounding line. You can easily craft this yourself. Grab some bark off a dead oak tree, never a live one. Snap it down to pieces roughly the size of your hand, and slowly bake it inside a sealed metal pail over a gentle campfire for roughly 4 hours. You are aiming for pitch black throughout, easily broken but not turning into ash. Keep it in a dry spot. A single batch will easily last you half a decade. The absolute maximum you will spend to build the ultimate version of this system, the wire, the ground rod, and the DIY roasted oak, is less than $40 to protect your entire home permanently. $40, paid just once, for as long as you live in that house. Weigh that against the fortune you have already thrown away battling this nuisance. Weigh it against the massive bills those cleanup crews hand you. Weigh it against those fancy air filters sitting in the corner doing nothing. This knowledge is what was stolen from you. Not some consumer good, not a mechanical toy, but basic everyday wisdom that every early Swiss and German settler in this nation understood. It was documented by a real scientist in 1897, backed up by Ivy League researchers in 2011, and preserved by a handful of Amish folks who simply refused to stop using it. You are absolutely not crazy for suspecting that a real answer was being kept from you. Something absolutely was, and now it isn't. If you are the type of person who suspects that genuine fixes get shoved into the shadows just so corporations can keep mailing you invoices, then you already know exactly what to do with the information I just gave you. I really want to hear your thoughts down in the comments. Let me know this. Which specific area of your home has been dealing with dampness the longest? Is it the washroom, the cellar, or some random wall you can't figure out? Drop it down below. I go through every single comment, and I am shaping the upcoming video directly from your answers. And if you are ready to keep taking back the practical wisdom that was stripped away from regular homeowners like us, hit that subscribe button. We are building a real movement here, recovering one lost trick at a time. My next video dives into why the Amish drop a single handful of burned wood ash straight into their drinking wells every single spring, and what it actually does to heavy metals and waterborne bacteria, stuff that would instantly get a modern chemist fired for admitting out loud. I will see you over there.